You're standing in a field. Not a beautiful field. Not the kind with morning light and mountain breezes. This is a field on the edge of a mid-sized city in the American Midwest. Flat, brown, edged by a tree line that blocks the wind. And apparently, for a period of time that you're only beginning to understand, blocked the sight lines of anyone who might have noticed what was happening here. It's October. Your breath makes clouds. There are 12 evidence markers in the ground. 12. You've been doing this for 19 years. You've worked homicide for 14 of those. You've seen things that restructured your understanding of what human beings are capable of. And you thought, genuinely believed, that you developed a specific internal callus that this work requires. The ability to be present at the worst thing and remain functional, professional, useful. 12 markers. Your partner is standing 10 feet away talking to the forensic team leader. She's using her case voice, flat, precise, stripped of everything personal. You taught her that voice. You modeled it for her for 3 years until she developed her own version of it. You don't have access to it right now. You look at the 12 markers and you think about the 12 people who are represented by them, and you think about how long this has been happening and the fact that you didn't know, that nobody knew, and you feel something that isn't quite grief and isn't quite rage and isn't quite guilt, but contains elements of all three. Then you put it away. You take out your notebook. You start at the beginning. It starts the way these things always start, with something that doesn't look like what it is. 3 years ago, a woman named Diane Marsh, 34, is found in a drainage ditch off a county road 12 miles outside the city. Cause of death, blunt force trauma, no witnesses, no immediate suspect. Her personal life is complicated in the specific ways that investigators are trained to find significant: a recent divorce, financial stress, an ex-husband with a temper and an alibi that holds up under 3 separate rounds of scrutiny. The case is assigned to you and your then partner, a 20-year veteran named Cal Briggs, who retires 8 months later and whose absence you still feel like a phantom limb. You work the Marsh case hard. You interview everyone in her life: family, friends, co-workers, neighbors, the ex-husband 4 separate times in 4 different configurations of pressure and sympathy and strategy. You process the physical evidence with a thoroughness that your lieutenant notes approvingly. You chase every lead until it either resolves or definitively dies. Nothing resolves. Nothing definitively dies either. The case goes cold, not officially, never officially in your mind, but practically. It sits in a box in your office, and you look at Diane Marsh's photo on the inside of the box lid every time you open it, and you think, I haven't forgotten. 14 months later, a woman named Susan Reeves, 41, is found in a similar location. Similar cause of death, different enough in the particulars that the connection isn't automatic. And in this job, you're trained, rightly, to be skeptical of pattern recognition. That might be your brain wanting a story more than the evidence providing one. But something pulls at you. Something quiet and persistent that you've learned over 19 years not to dismiss. You put the 2 files side by side. You start making a list. Similarities are easy to find if you're looking for them. That's the danger. You spend 2 weeks being rigorous, actively arguing against your own hypothesis, looking for the ways the 2 cases are different, the ways the connection could be coincidental. You write down every dissimilarity. You make yourself take them seriously. At the end of 2 weeks, you have a list of differences and a list of similarities, and the similarities are more specific and more structural, and you can't talk yourself out of what they're telling you. You go to your lieutenant. His name is Frank Adiemi. He's been running the homicide division for 6 years, is 2 years from retirement, and has the specific disposition of a man who has been wrong about enough things to be appropriately cautious about being right. You lay out the 2 cases, the similarities, your analysis. He listens without interrupting, which is how you know he's taking it seriously. Then he says, if you're right, we have a problem. If you're wrong, we have a bigger problem. Because we'll have spent resources chasing a ghost while real leads go cold. How confident are you? You tell him honestly, 70%, maybe 75%. He tells you to keep working it quietly. One person, you. No task force, no additional resources, not yet. Find him something that moves it past 80% and he'll escalate. You go back to your desk. You pull every unsolved female homicide in a 200-mile radius going back 7 years. You find 4 more cases that fit. 6 victims. You're looking for one person who's been doing this for at least 7 years and who has never once appeared on anyone's radar. You go back to Adiemi. He picks up his phone and calls the FBI. The FBI sends 2 agents. Special Agent Rebecca Cho is 38, Behavioral Analysis Unit, the kind of precisely calibrated intelligence that makes you feel simultaneously respected and slightly outmatched. Special Agent David Marsh, no relation to your first victim, a coincidence that everyone finds uncomfortable and nobody mentions, is 44, 20 years in, with the specific authority of someone who has done exactly this before and knows where the bodies of previous investigations are buried, metaphorically and occasionally literally. The 4 of you, your partner, Detective Yolanda Reyes, who joined your division 2 years ago, Cho and Marsh, form the core of what gets officially designated the Corridor Task Force. The name is deliberately bland. Everything about the public-facing elements of this investigation is deliberately bland. You've agreed collectively that premature disclosure creates 3 problems. It alerts the subject, it generates tips that overwhelm your capacity to process them, and it creates media pressure that distorts investigative decision-making in ways that are well documented and entirely destructive. You work out of a room in the basement of the federal building. Conference table, whiteboards, a wall that becomes, over weeks, a geography of everything you know and everything you don't. Agent Cho builds the profile. You watch this process with the specific fascination of someone who respects a skill they don't fully possess. She goes through every case file, not just the physical evidence, but everything. The locations, the victim selection, the timeline, the method. She's building a picture of a person from the negative space they've left in the world. What emerges is this. White male, almost certainly, 35 to 50. Organized, the absence of forensic evidence across 6 scenes over 7 years indicates methodical, disciplined crime scene management. Not impulsive. Probably employed in a job that involves some combination of physical work and geographic mobility. Likely presents as normal. Friendly, perhaps even likable. The kind of person neighbors describe as quiet and kept to himself only in retrospect. Comfortable with the outdoors. Knowledgeable about the specific geography of the corridor, the drainage systems, the county roads, the patterns of land use that create locations that are both accessible and isolated. He's not a stranger to this region. He knows it. He lives here. 3 months into the task force. The investigation has a shape now, not a suspect, but a shape. You've established that all 6 victims were last seen within a specific geographic band running northeast to southwest across 3 counties. You've mapped their last known locations against the disposal sites and identified a convergence zone, an area where the lines between where they were taken and where they were left intersect with a statistical frequency that isn't coincidence. The convergence zone covers approximately 340 square miles. It contains 47,000 people. You start working the geography. Every registered sex offender in the zone, 23 of them, each requiring individual assessment and in most cases elimination. Every person with a relevant criminal history. Every name that appears in more than one victim's life, however tangentially. You're building a matrix of people and connections and looking for anything that shouldn't be there. Yolanda is extraordinary at this. She has a tolerance for the grinding, repetitive work of elimination that you respect enormously. The ability to treat the 200th dead-end interview with the same rigor as the first, knowing that any one of them could be the thread that unravels everything. Agent Marsh is managing the FBI's parallel tracks. Database searches, forensic analysis at the federal level, coordination with law enforcement in adjacent jurisdictions who may have cases you haven't identified yet. That last track produces something. A case in a neighboring state. 4 years ago, a woman found in circumstances close enough to your pattern that Marsh's team flags it. You drive 4 hours and spend a day with the detectives who worked it. You come back with a file and a feeling. 7 victims now. Maybe 8. There's a missing persons case from 6 years ago that fits the victimology and the geography and whose body has never been found. Maybe 8. You go home that night and sit in your kitchen and don't eat the dinner you made. And think about 8 people and 1 person who is somewhere in 340 square miles going about his life, and you feel the specific rage of knowing something is true and not being able to prove it. Your ex-wife calls, you don't answer. You'll call her back tomorrow. You've been saying that for 3 years. 7 months in, something breaks. A tip comes through a channel you didn't expect. Not the tip line, which has generated 847 calls, of which approximately 12 have been genuinely useful and none have been decisive. This comes to a victim's family member. The sister of Susan Reeves, your second victim, who has been quietly doing her own investigation the way grieving people sometimes do, driven by a need to do something in the face of institutional slowness. She's been talking to people in her sister's life, and she's found something, a name that appears in her sister's phone records from the 6 months before her death. Not a contact saved under a name, an unknown number that called 4 times in the final 2 months. She tracked the number through channels you don't ask about, and it leads to a prepaid phone purchased with cash at a convenience store in the convergence zone 18 months ago. The phone is dead, inactive, but the purchase location is specific and the timing is right, and it's the most concrete thread you've had in 7 months. You pull the convenience store's records. The store has security footage, but only retains 30 days. The footage is long gone. But they have a loyalty program and a record of every transaction at that register on that day. 12 cash purchases. 12 people who weren't loyalty program members and paid cash and left no name. 12 ghosts. You and Yolanda spend 2 weeks trying to reconstruct who those 12 people were. It's painstaking, granular, at times absurd. You're interviewing the store clerks about customers from 18 months ago, showing photo arrays that produce nothing reliable, cross-referencing with the store's other records for any thread that might lead somewhere. On the 14th day, Yolanda finds something. A delivery log. The store received a supply delivery that day, and the driver signed in. She tracks the driver. He remembers the day because something happened. a fender bender in the parking lot when he arrived. He remembers another vehicle. He can't remember the plate, but he remembers the make and model and color because it was the same truck his brother-in-law drives, and he'd noticed it for that reason. It's not enough, but it's something. You run every registered vehicle of that make, model, and color in the 3-county convergence zone. 63 vehicles. You start working through them. 9 months in, his name is Robert Cale. He's 47. He works for a county water management authority, a job that gives him legitimate access to the drainage systems, the county roads, the isolated geography of the corridor. He's lived in the region his entire life. He has no criminal record. He owns a home on 12 acres of land on the rural edge of the convergence zone. His neighbors describe him as quiet, keeps to himself, polite when you see him, has a dog. You find him through the vehicle registration cross-reference. His truck matches the description. And then you find him again in a piece of data you almost missed. A county employee access log showing his work vehicle in a specific location on a specific date. That puts him within 4 miles of where Susan Reeves was last seen on the day she disappeared. It's not enough. Not even close to enough for an arrest. Not enough for a warrant. Barely enough for a conversation, legally speaking. But it's him. You know it with the certainty that comes from 9 months of living inside this investigation. From knowing every detail of every case until the shape of what you're looking for is as familiar as a face. You take everything to Adeyemi and Cho and Marsh. Cho goes through it carefully, methodically, checking your work the way you want your work checked. Then she looks up and says, "It fits." All of it fits. Adeyemi says, "Build the case, everything legal, everything bulletproof. I don't want to hand a defense attorney a single thing. You start building." For 6 weeks, Robert Cale lives his life while you watch every moment of it. Court-authorized surveillance, phone, vehicle, and physical. A rotating team of 8 people who maintain coverage without ever being noticed, which is harder than television makes it look and requires a sustained discipline that is genuinely exhausting over weeks. You watch him go to work, you watch him shop for groceries, you watch him attend a church service, which produces in you a complicated reaction you process by going for a very long run that night. You watch him drive his county vehicle along the drainage corridors of the 3 counties and stop at locations that are entirely consistent with his job and also entirely consistent with someone checking on things he's left behind. On the 23rd day of surveillance, he drives to a location, a specific county road at the edge of the 3rd county. He parks, he walks into a tree line. He's in there for 11 minutes. He comes out and drives away. You don't follow him into the tree line. Not yet. You document and you wait. On the 31st day, you get the forensic results you've been waiting for. Trace evidence from one of the original crime scenes has been reanalyzed with a newer technique and has produced a partial DNA profile. It's not enough for a conviction on its own, but it's enough for a comparison. You get a warrant for a DNA sample. The comparison comes back in 4 days. You're sitting in the task force room when Marsh gets the call. You watch his face as he listens. He hangs up. He looks at you. It's him. Robert Cale is arrested on a Tuesday morning at 7:14 a.m. in the driveway of his home on 12 acres of rural land. He doesn't run. He doesn't resist. He looks at the 8 law enforcement officers, surrounding him with an expression that you'll spend a long time trying to read afterward. Not surprised exactly. More like a man who's been waiting for something for a very long time and has developed, in the waiting, a strange relationship with its arrival. He says nothing. Not in the hours afterwards. His lawyer arrives within 2 hours, a criminal defense attorney from the city, who is very good at his job and who will spend the next 2 years being very good at his job in ways that are entirely proper and that you will find extremely difficult not to take personally. The search of his property takes 11 days. On the field behind his tree line, you find evidence that resolves 8 cases, including the missing persons case from 6 years ago. The 12 markers in that first field that you stood in front of at the beginning of this story are his too, confirmed over the following weeks through forensic work that is meticulous and exhausting and necessary. 12 confirmed victims, possibly more. There are geographic gaps in the timeline that Cho believes represent cases you haven't found yet, in jurisdictions that don't know to look. You spend 3 days calling families. It's the hardest thing you've ever done. Not the calls where families collapse, those are devastating, but they make sense. They're the human response to the worst news. The hardest ones are the calls where someone has been waiting so long, has been in such a sustained state of not knowing for so many years, that what they feel when you tell them is something close to relief, the specific horror of grief being better than uncertainty. You think about that for a long time. Robert Cale pleads not guilty. The trial takes 8 months. You testify for 4 days. The defense attorney does everything he's supposed to do, and some of it is genuinely effective. And there are 2 days in the middle of the trial where you can see the jury's uncertainty, and you feel something that has no clean name. He's convicted on all counts. You're in the corridor outside the courtroom when the verdict comes through. You don't go back in for the reading. You stand in the corridor with Yolanda. And neither of you says anything for a while. And then she says, "It's done." And you say, "Yeah." And neither of you feels what you thought you'd feel. Because Diane Marsh is still gone, and Susan Reeves, and all the others, and Robert Cale existing in a cell somewhere doesn't change the specific weight of 12 evidence markers in an October field. It just means you did your job. You go back to your desk. There's another file waiting. There's always another file waiting. You open it. So what does every level of a serial killer investigation actually look like? It looks nothing like the television version. There's no dramatic breakthrough moment where everything snaps into focus. There's no scene where the brilliant investigator stands in front of a wall of evidence and suddenly sees the pattern everyone else missed. There's just work. Relentless, grinding, patient work. Dead ends that cost weeks. Leads that feel significant and resolve to nothing. The slow accumulation of detail upon detail upon detail until the weight of it becomes something you can take to a prosecutor and say, "Here, this is what happened, this is who did it, this is what we can prove." The investigators who do this work carry it in ways that don't show from the outside. Every unsolved case is a specific weight that doesn't go away. Every solved case brings a resolution that is real and necessary, and that somehow falls short of what you needed it to be. Because what you needed it to be is the undoing of something that cannot be undone. You do it anyway. Because someone has to. Because Diane Marsh deserves someone who opens that box and looks at her photo and says, "I haven't forgotten." Because the 12 markers in a field on the edge of a mid-sized city in the American Midwest represent 12 people who went about their lives in the ordinary human way. Making coffee, worrying about money, loving people imperfectly, planning things they never got to do. And someone has to stand in that field and start at the beginning and not stop.